Hey, welcome to Tales from the Troll Hole. I'm your host, Cecil B, and together we're going to dive deep into the internet and find what stories there are to be read, enjoyed, laughed at, cried with, you name it. Thanks for coming along on this journey with me. Now grab your torch and pitchfork. Let's dive into this troll hole. Welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Troll Hole. So I recently plugged this podcast at the last stand-up comedy open mic I did. So if you are here from that, welcome. Please subscribe. You are helping me live my dream, and I'm glad that you're here. If you are not here because of the stand-up show that I did, I'm still glad that you're here, and I hope you enjoy the show. This week, I am continuing my dive into strange things. Last week, we talked about doppelgangers and skinwalkers and mimics, which was super creepy. And today, I'm going to go into some unexplained phenomena, like the most mysterious ones that people can find. Not all of these will be verifiable. Not all of these will probably be accurate. Once again, if you are unfamiliar, I take a lot of my information and stories from Reddit, so you'll have to take all of it with a grain of whatever seasoning you choose. And when I get into a story, I'm just going to read the username of the person who's writing it, and you'll just have to know that it's from Reddit. If I read anything that's not from Reddit, I will say where it's from. I will cite my source. Scout's honor. I just had an iced coffee. It was a white chocolate strawberry flavored cold brew with sweet cream, and I am amped, ready to dive into these mysterious mysteries and phenomenal phenomena with you today. Phenomena. I have to do that. It's not something I can control. I literally have to do it. Okay. I didn't introduce myself. I did it in the intro, but I'll do it again. I'm Cecil B. I'm your host. Thanks for joining me. And let's get into it, shall we? So this Reddit thread is titled, What Mystery or Unexplained Phenomena Made You Go, What the Fuck? The first story comes from Nick357. I was doing an audit of a public program. I pulled a sample from something like 60,000 people. There was 12 people with the same name in the same town. I thought this was a clerical error, so I asked for backup. I found out 6 were really different people, but 6 others had the same middle initial and birthday. I asked for IDs, and they sent me 8. There were 8 people with the same first and last name, same middle initial, same birthday, born in the same area. The 2 extras were 2 people with all those similarities, but they both had died. Here's the kicker. They died on the same day. I think about this all the time. That is incredibly bizarre. That is so wild. I need to know the actual, if anyone does statistics and mathematical calculatings out there, I would love to know what the odds of that happening are from the sample of 60,000 people. That is so strange. The comment below it says witness protection? ? Yep, that could be it, honestly. But why would there be so many of them in the same area? What if there's a witness protection town and nobody else knows that everybody else in this town is from witness protection? And it's got to be hard making up names all the time and different birthdays. Oh, wow. That'd be so strange. That's a good one. I think I also would think about that all the time if I were that person who encountered that. I don't think I'd be able to let it go. Our next one comes from Saint Chas 77. I've posted this before, but I don't mind sharing it again. When my sister and I were kids, we were out front of our home playing near the mailbox. Mom and Dad were there by the window watching, and according to them, my mother turned to my father and asked him to bring us inside. He shrugged her off, but she became more urgent. He asked why it was a problem, and she suddenly panicked and started heading towards the front door, despite being less than a week away from giving birth to our youngest sister. He stopped her and stepped outside to call us in, and we complied. Less than a minute later, a car came barreling down the street at high speed and struck our mailbox, destroying it. We both would have been killed instantly. My parents have never felt entirely comfortable talking about it. I just got such wild goosebumps. That is insane. The comment below says, you and your sister may want to consider your role and importance to the world. No kidding. What the fuck? That's gotta be the sort of mental equivalent to when your hair stands on end when you're about to get struck by lightning. You don't know what's happening, but something is happening. And I'm so glad that she was able to vocalize what it was, because I think I've heard before that whenever accidents happen, someone said it felt weird right beforehand, but they could not describe what it was. So thankfully, that mom could describe. But oh my goodness, the pressure to do something good with your life after that must be unbelievable. And I bet you they don't let you live it down either. And what a relief for the person who ran into the mailbox too, because can you imagine how awful that would be for everyone? Wow. The next story comes from Ziphius, and the phenomenon they're talking about is the placebo effect. I know it's not new and shocking, but man, is the placebo effect strange. For example, someone with Parkinson's disease will not produce enough dopamine and are often given dopamine as medicine to slow down the horrible effects of Parkinson's. Researchers gave a patient with Parkinson's a placebo when he thought he was given a dopamine pill, and the brain started to produce dopamine because it believed it was given it. This is in spite of having a disease which hinders the production of dopamine. And they linked to a PDF, I think, that talks about the data associated with that study. But that is, I don't understand that either. That is so fascinating. The comment below it says, think of all the things we could accomplish if we didn't know what wasn't possible. And the next comment says, even crazier is that it still works even when you know it's a placebo. Now, I will say that this comment thread is 8 years old at this point, so there's got to be even more data that's available. And I think there's a lot of that you can do on your own. It's not just physical ailments. The whole thing of fake it till you make it, that's real. That absolutely is real. Like, whenever I have coworkers that come to work and they're like, oh man, I'm having such a bad day, it's like, pretend that you're not. It sounds silly. Pretend that you're not. And that's not to minimize the issues that they're having. But if you pretend you're having a good day, eventually you will be having a good day. It's some kind of mental placebo, but you know that it's fake, but it still works. It's very bizarre. And that was an excellent example of it. That's incredible. Like, we know what the limits are, but when we really want to, we can circumvent those limits and accomplish seemingly impossible things. I wish my brain would make dopamine on command. That's so cool. All right, the next story comes from Definitely Not Nick. My cousin dropped her kids off at daycare 11 years ago and was never seen again. Her face has been plastered all over my state. She's been on countless news segments and was even featured on the missing persons segment of America's Most Wanted. Then a few years back, her name came up in a torture case where the guy threatened to put his victim in the same hole he put Melanie in. Her case is no closer to being solved. What? Yeah, I guess it's mystery or phenomenon. So yeah, this mystery. Oh, that's so awful, because there are so many people who have people that go missing, and unfortunately they not only don't get to know what happened, but when or why or who. They get to know nothing, and I cannot even imagine the horror that is. Having no answers whatsoever and being gaslit by everybody who can do anything about it. I listen to a lot of podcasts and nonfiction books surrounding missing people's cases. And so often the powers that be are very quick to dismiss whoever it is as a runaway if they're underage, or they just wanted to drop it all and start over. They just wanted a brand new life. Nobody does that. Nobody fucking does that. That's wild. So just to hear that over and over again when you know that something else happened must be absolutely maddening. They included a link through the charlieproject.org, but that sounds really sad, so I don't know if I want to click on it. The next one comes from Churros Ricos. The fact that we don't know what's living in the Marianas Trench, the most intriguing thing to me is the idea of deep sea gigantism and the effects that it could have on creatures living there. Ooh, yes, absolutely. And I don't know if this has been debunked or not. I don't know how it could be, but the fact that we know less about the oceans than we do about the outer space. Because what's going on in that trench? Let's see. I'm going to click on this link for deep sea gigantism, and it better not be a bait and switch of a link. 1 second. Okay, so this is the Wikipedia page. So, again, take it with a grain of garlic. Deep sea gigantism, or abyssal gigantism, is a tendency for species of deep sea dwelling animals to be larger than their shallower water relatives across a large taxonomic range. Proposed explanations for this type of gigantism include necessary adaptation to colder temperature, food scarcity, reduced predation, pressure, and increased dissolved oxygen concentrations in the deep sea. The harsh conditions and inhospitality of the underwater environment in general, as well as the inaccessibility of the abyssal zone for most human-made underwater vehicles, have hindered the study of this topic. Well, shit. How are we supposed to figure it out? Okay, I know how we're supposed to, but the technology isn't there yet, commercially, or consumers to know about. I'm sure it exists. We'll go down that rabbit hole of secret technology and the slow release of exponential technological advancement for our own sanity's sake. We'll go down that rabbit hole another time. But right now, I think the only way that I could think would be that we would need to transfer consciousness. We would need to be able to transfer consciousness or record the consciousness of a being that can see at that depth in a kind of light that we'd be able to filter an image through, kind of like when we take images of deep space and we run it through different light filters, because it would look like nothing to our eyes because it's not in our visible spectrum. So if we can find a way to see through the eyes of a creature who can live down there at those depths and record it on our end, that would be dope. However, that opens up the whole can of worms of is it ethical to do that? Would the creature still inhabit their own consciousness? Or would we be taking it over? Would we be taking the life and leaving an empty shell that we'd be using as some sort of submersible camera? Very interesting things to think about here. That Wikipedia page is fascinating. There's a whole section on the impact of climate change, and unfortunately, there are a lot of pictures of spider crabs, which is less than ideal. The next one comes from Zapf Chance. Gravity is really poorly understood. Newton's laws describe its effects well at the macroscopic scale, but break down for describing really small and really large phenomena. General relativity helps, but again, it's descriptive more than explanatory, and a quantum theory of gravity is still a dream. It's one of the 4 fundamental forces of nature's, but we can't explain how it propagates or where it comes from, and why, compared to the other forces, is gravity so, quote-unquote, weak. Work at CERN on the Higgs boson may shed some light, but for the moment, we can't explain why I always fall down and not up when I drink too much. And isn't that interesting? That gravity is still just a quote-unquote theory. I mean, obviously, gravity is doing shit, and we understand the effects of it, but not the cause of it. And that is truly fascinating to me. So very good. That's a really good one. Okay, here's one from a deleted user. Deja vu. There's a theory that it's just a little memory whoopsie, but nobody is even close to knowing exactly what causes it. I actually have a pretty cool theory about deja vu. I don't know if I've shared this here before, so if I have, bear with me. I'm just a little guy. So some people think that it is scent related, and it's just a distant memory where your wires get crossed based on a very specific smell. So it's accessing your memory area of the brain. I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm not even a brain nurse. I don't understand it. So you're accessing the smell section of recollection, but it's drawing from present experience and crossing with the memory stuff. So it's kind of making your brain confused. Like, is this a memory? Did we do this already? But it's just the smell part that is the memory. So that's one thing that I've read. I don't remember where I read that. So sorry. I said I was going to cite my sources. I fucking lied. Okay? I don't remember. The sources, I don't fucking remember. And here's the theory that I have. I think, of course, I do believe in the multiverse and parallel universes. And I think that there are versions of the universes that are so close to each other, not distance-wise per se, but in content. So there's this version of you right here, and then there's another version of you in another universe that has done everything exactly the same and will do everything exactly the same, except you're wearing a blue shirt today. Everything else is the same except for you're wearing a blue shirt in one and a red shirt in the other. That's it. So I think that in those dimensions, when you are having those moments of crossover where you're doing something at the exact same time and in the exact same way, but something is just slightly different, that's when you have that moment of like, is this different? Did we do this already? It's just a too close crossover of you in another universe. That's a theory that I have that brings me joy to think about. Oh, my dog just farted. Murph, gross. All right, the next ones that we're going to hear are from a thread asking about the most puzzling unexplained events in world history. The first one comes from Go Zarian. The 1808 mystery eruption. Scientists have discovered that there was a giant volcanic eruption somewhere in the South Pacific in 1808. It was at least comparable to Krakatoa. They based it on secondary data, weather observations in South America, ice core readings, pine tree rings, etc. Thing is, no one knows exactly which volcano went kaboom in 1808, which is odd because a volcanic eruption of that size should have been noticed by someone. All right, there's a link to the Wikipedia article. Let me go on over there. So the Wikipedia page says the 1808 mystery eruption is one or potentially multiple unidentified volcanic eruptions that resulted in a significant rise in stratospheric sulfur aerosols, leading to a period of global cooling analogous to the year without a summer. Wow. So it looks like, based on the reports of increased sulfur readings, they suspect it is between Indonesia and Tonga. But that's wild because, I mean, if that were to happen again, it'd be nice to know which one we should be looking at. Oh no. Fear of volcanoes unlocked. Also, side note, I think Krakatoa is one of the most phonetically pleasing words I have ever said. The next one from Young Discord says, that one time a whole town danced itself to death for no reason. Okay, so I think that person is referring to the dancing plague of 1518. And it's when people just were dancing for weeks, and it was some sort of mass hysteria phenomenon. People in the town just started dancing after this one person started dancing on July 14th. In the street, she just started dancing, and everybody started to join a little bit at a time, and they would not drink, they would not eat, they would not stop, and they started to have heart attacks or die of thirst or hunger, or they would get trampled. There were strokes even, and sometimes they were crying for help, but they could not stop dancing. And it's all very bizarre. I think one thing that could have caused this is food poisoning, specifically a kind of fungus called ergot. Ergotism is the disease of it, but it's a fungus that grows on grain. And I think pretty historically, in the 1500s, it was not the pinnacle of food safety that we're talking about here. So I think that is the most likely explanation. But can you imagine if that happened these days? Everybody who went to Taco Bell in a certain week just all of a sudden started dancing? What the fuck? How scary that must have been, not only for the people in the throes of it, but for onlookers who just like didn't want to eat bread that day and were just like, what is happening? What a time to be gluten-free, by the way. That was like the one time you had the advantage if you didn't eat wheat. And I know celiac disease probably didn't happen back then because they had nice, natural, organic, un-GMO'd wheat or whatever the fuck. I'm not talking about that, okay? Calm down. You're okay. Everything's fine. There's a sub-comment that says, there's an amazing book about this, Time to Dance, A Time to Die. There are plenty of historical resources about the attempts to contain and manage the problem. It was more than one town for a start and lasted for a while, so they had to come up with ways to handle the contagion, for want of a better word. I think the author concluded that it was sort of a physical manifestation of a widespread psychological trauma. There was widespread poverty and famine at the time and lots of other stress factors like religious oppression, etc. So maybe it was both. Maybe it was a physical manifestation of a psychological issue that was made worse by ergot poisoning. All right, here's another one that's from the 1500s. It's from a deleted user, but it says the 1561 celestial phenomenon over Nuremberg, essentially a mass UFO sighting. Check out the drawings. And a sub-comment says, some interesting things that were noted on the German Wikipedia entry on this. The main drawing, weird for other reasons as well. It doesn't include one of the most prominent buildings of the city, a large castle, to the time it was created, but included a church that burned down a good bit prior, which together with the other chronological weirdness lends itself to the theory that the artist was mixing and catching several more benign meteorological events to make a stronger case to be a good Christian, because otherwise God will screw you over. That's interesting. So sort of making a compilation of meteorological events to scare people. I mean, that's a good theory, but also it is very bizarre. And I think one thing I've noticed about past attempts to draw and paint UFOs is that they're always in the UFOs. How do I put this? The UFOs are always looking to be made out of whatever the technology was available at the time. So if we're in the Da Vinci era, the drawings are going to be of a wood winged box in the sky, and nowadays we have all sorts of metallic things and all kinds of shapes and colors, and you see a lot of smooth, round, metallic ones. And there are some that look more like modern day airplanes. And then there's some that look like birds, like way back far away when that was the only thing in the sky was birds. So it's just interesting that people have a hard time describing things that they don't understand. So they go to the next closest thing that's available. What's the most advanced sky thing available? And then that's what it looks like. So that's just an interesting thing that I notice and that I like. The next one comes from Sophia Longnemovich. That's funny. This is the story of Gloria Ramirez, aka the Toxic Lady. I apologize for my pronunciation. Oh, it's Ramirez. It was a typo. Understood. Got it. At about 8:15 p.m. on the evening of February 19th, 1994, Ramirez, suffering from the side effects of advanced cervical cancer, was brought into the emergency room of Riverside General Hospital by paramedics. She was extremely confused and was suffering from tachycardia and Cheyne Stokes respiration. The medical staff injected her with diazepam, midazolam, and lorazepam to sedate her. When it became clear that Ramirez was responding poorly to treatment, the staff tried to defibrillate her heart. At that point, several people saw an oily sheen covering Ramirez's body, and some noticed a fruity, garlic-like odor that they thought was coming from her mouth. A registered nurse named Susan Kane attempted to draw blood from Ramirez's arm and noticed an ammonia-like smell coming from the tube. She passed the syringe to Julie Gorchinsky, a medical resident, who noticed manila-colored particles floating in the blood. At this point, Kane fainted and was removed from the room. Shortly thereafter, Gorchinsky began to feel nauseated, complaining that she was lightheaded. She left the trauma room and sat at a nurse's desk. A staff member asked her if she was okay, but before she could respond, she also fainted. Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist who was assisting in the trauma room, was the third to pass out. The staff was then ordered to evacuate all emergency room patients to the parking lot outside the hospital. Overall, 23 people became ill and 5 were hospitalized. A skeleton crew stayed behind to stabilize Ramirez. At 8:50 p.m., after 45 minutes of CPR and defibrillation, Ramirez was pronounced dead from kidney failure related to her cancer. That is super weird. That is so weird. Because those are medical professionals. They're not just going to pass out for no fucking reason. Like, I pass out every time I go to get any kind of blood draw or injection or anything. But this is different. The sub-comment below that says, Gorchinsky denied that she had been affected by mass hysteria and pointed to her own medical history as evidence. After the exposure, she spent 2 weeks in the intensive care unit with breathing problems. She developed hepatitis and avascular necrosis in her knees. Riverside Coroner's Office contacted Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory to investigate the incident. Livermore Labs postulated that Ramirez had been using dimethyl sulfoxide, a solvent used as a powerful degreaser, as a home remedy for pain. Users of this substance report that it has a garlic-like taste. Sold in gel form at hardware stores, it could also explain the greasy appearance of Ramirez's body. The Livermore scientists theorized that the DMSO in Ramirez's system might have built up owing to a urinary blockage caused by her kidney failure. Oxygen administered by the paramedics would have combined with the DMSO to form dimethyl sulfone. It is also known to crystallize at room temperature, and crystals were observed in some of Ramirez's drawn blood. Electric shocks administered during the emergency defibrillation could have then converted the DMSO2 into dimethyl sulfate, DMSO4, a powerful poisonous gas, exposure to which would have caused reported symptoms of the emergency room staff. The Livermore scientists postulated on the new detectives that the change in temperature of the blood drawn from 98.6 of Ramirez's body to the 64 degrees of the emergency room may have also contributed to its conversion from DMSO2 into DMSO4. Holy shit, that is crazy. Okay, I'm going to be honest. When I was reading the first part of it, I thought, well, she had to have been using something to self-treat, because why else would that have happened? I mean, people's bodies can't just do that, right? I mean, I'm not going to say they can't, because then I'm going to get proven wrong 1,000 times over, but it's very unlikely, right? And so that's exactly what was happening. She was self-treating and had this thing, but it just sort of seemed like a cocktail of terrible events that happened because of the volatileness of that chemical. And that's why we need better healthcare, so that people don't go and medicate themselves at the fucking Home Depot. That poor lady, I mean, she must have been suffering so much that she had to go to Home Depot and try to treat herself. And then all of those people dealt with all those repercussions. And good for that nurse for being like, hey, I'm not having mass hysteria, you idiots. Let's look at some data and figure it out. Good for you. Good for you, nurse. Great job. Wait, maybe not a nurse, maybe a resident. I apologize for the confusion. You are a resident. You are not a nurse. Not that it's bad to be a nurse. Let's just move on. All right, here's one from Just a Sexy Kurt. The Mary Celeste. Found with no life or bodies on board, but with all cargo from the Ledger still on board, likely ruling out piracy. None of the crew were ever found. Wow, I love a boat mystery. I love a boat mystery. Because ain't nobody knows what's going on out there on those boats. Even today, can't hardly get reception. Boatland is a trap. Never go on the ocean unless, just don't do it. Not that I fear the ocean itself, but I fear what people are capable of on the ocean. You get, like, bonkers out there with all the direct sunlight and no land in sight. You start to, what's like cabin fever, but like ocean madness. It's something like that. Just get off of the ocean, you guys. Knock it off. Especially back then when everybody was just drinking rum all the time. Rum and seawater. Ugh. I will say time and time again that in the past, before people understood that they needed to drink water, they were just hooking back wine and beer all day, every day, and we were amazed at the crazy stuff that they were doing. Nope, that's wild. Makes perfect sense to me. Everybody was all stinky and drunk all the time. Of course they were starting wars and coming up with crazy torturing techniques, and people were vanishing off of boats left and right. Everybody was honking plastered and bored. Absolutely wild. Okay, so here's a historical mystery thread. Historical mysteries that are likely never to be solved. Okay, this is from, not even gonna try to pronounce this one. What Pope Leo said to Attila the Hun. Attila was taking over the world and made it to Rome and the Vatican. Leo rode out alone and spoke to Attila and convinced Attila not to destroy Rome and the Vatican. What was said, only the archives of the Vatican has any idea. Okay, but can we not ask them? Why can't we know if the archives have it? We don't have to have an outside person go in there. Just go in there and ask them. And then if they say something stupid, then we'll know they're lying. So problem solved. Mostly. Not really at all. Damn it. Another mystery that won't be solved, according to Wild Entertainment 56, is the real identity of Jack the Ripper. This one haunts me. It really, really haunts me as a true crime listener, learner, observer, that I've heard so many theories, and all of them seem to have evidence that could back it up, except for H.H. Holmes. I don't think it was H.H. Holmes. That's just, the timeline isn't right for how long it takes to travel across the ocean in those days. Again, open ocean. Stay away from it. I think I'm just going to have to do a separate episode talking about the different theories that people have about who Jack the Ripper actually was. There's no need to go into the crimes. Everybody knows they're just grisly and awful. But I really want to talk about who people think it was. And then, just really go into the different reasons and why it could be this person and why it could not. So maybe I'll do that. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. I don't know. Remains to be seen. The next comment from LLCUCF80. I don't know. I want it to be solved, but it's seemingly more and more unlikely each day. D.B. Cooper. Yep, that is a huge mystery. The sub-comment says, something people don't realize either is that D.B. Cooper landed in the area where Mount St. Helens erupted. If there was any physical evidence, including his remains, they could very well have been destroyed 9 years after the hijacking. That is a great point. I've never thought about that point. Bruh, the mystery was thwarted by a volcano. That has to be it. Okay, here's one that actually legitimately is so upsetting. This from Weak Carpenter 7060. What works were lost from the Library of Alexandria? I cannot even begin to describe the pain of just what exactly was lost. We will never know, and that kills me to no end. I think after I die, this would be cool. This would be cool. So, after you die, what if you get to pick 5 major questions? No, let's make it 10. Let's make it 10. 10 major questions that you will have answered. You just get to go see exactly what happened, and you can replay it as many times as you want before you go on to the next one, just so you fully understand. And you get follow-up questions as well. 10 per each event, so a total of 100 questions. you get to have answered. That might be a really good book idea, honestly. But that would be so cool. That would be one of mine, is what was lost in the library of Alexandria. And as part of that, I would get to read all of it. And I would understand every language because those are the rules. I can do what I want. So that would be neat. You know, time flies so fast when we are talking about beautiful, wonderful mysteries and horrible, scary mysteries. And that's why I love doing them so much. It's so fun. I could just keep going and keep going, but I've got to make dinner and I've got to take the dogs out. Okay? Sorry. I'm sorry. Sure, I could go do that and then come back and continue the episode, but that's not how my brain works. So right now we're going to talk about some frog facts. All right, so our frog facts today are coming from the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, arc-trust.org. And the question that I wanted to know is, where do frogs go in the winter? Because if you're like me, you think about that all the time. Once the silence happens after all the croaking in the spring, summer, late fall, all of a sudden you're met with silence and you're like, where did everybody go? Now, this is a British site, but I would imagine most frogs have similar situations in winter settings. So this is from that website, and it's from an article, Where Do Frogs Go in the Winter? In Britain, common frogs largely hibernate on land. They usually find somewhere underground or tucked inside a structure that sits on the ground surface. Hence, frogs might overwinter in a mammal burrow or inside a compost heap. The important thing is that it's a place where the frog will be buffered against extreme cold and won't lose too much water. Having permeable skins, frogs are at risk of drying out if they spend long in a place with no moisture. Some adult male common frogs spend the winter in ponds secreted among leaves and mud at the bottom. This is a risky strategy, as smaller ponds can freeze over and the frogs can sometimes die through a lack of oxygen. But clearly for some frogs, the benefit of being first in the pond when the females arrive in the spring means the risk is worth taking. Outside gardens, common frogs often hibernate in larger ponds and those with some inflow, which means freezing is less likely. You heard it you heard it here first, folks. Frogs hibernate. I didn't know that amphibians could hibernate. That is so cool. Oh, it's literally cool. How nice. That's terrific. And yet again, they are breaking the norms of what we thought was possible for life on this planet. Frogs are so goddamn cool, and they absolutely have got to be aliens. For real. They arrived partially frozen, but not too frozen, on some sort of comet or asteroid, and then just have been fucking rad ever since. I can't handle it. It's way too cool. Now we know. And I have a little pond by my house too. So now in the winter, I'm going to look around and be like, are you guys in there? And there is a little inlet too. So I bet you there's a ton of frogs hibernating in that little pond. I'm going to leave them alone. Don't worry. I'm not going to go looking for them, but it's just going to bring me peace to know what's going on. So I'll just know that they're taking a little nap out there. A little 3-month nap. Okay. Well, that's all the time I have for this week, pals. Next week, maybe we'll do some Jack the Ripper theories, maybe some Black Dahlia theories. They have been done and done and done a million times over. But I want to do it. I want a turn. It is my turn, damn it. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to Tales from the Troll Hole. I'm your host, Cecil B, and this show is produced by me. Our theme song is by Vervex. They're a great band. You should give them a listen. You can stream them anywhere. They're also on TikTok and Instagram. Remember to subscribe so that you don't miss out on a single episode. And also find us on Instagram, and then you can send in your own stories. I just ask that they're true and that they're not going to scar somebody for life. You know what I mean? Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.